Hello. I was just thinking, again, my degree was in history and theology, and I had that experience I told when my mom killed herself, and I heard that whatever that energy was, I just have a big wondering what is that? What was that energy? Because it still seems to hang around in my life. So I read a lot of, I read the Bible cover to cover 4 times in college because of my classes, and I also read the Quran a couple times, and I'm reading it in English, and I suspect it's probably not accurate um, because it's being translated from Arabic into English, and it's usually being translated by somebody who may not be Arabic, may not be Islamic. So I don't know that what I read was actually what's meant. But at the same time, it was interesting to read. I've read a lot of yoga books, but some of the Bhagavad Gita. I'm working my way, excuse me while I stand up here. I'm working my way through the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. It's pretty cool because, like, the opening description of what's going on is talks about the 3 bodies. About you have the physical body, the thought body, and the seer. Like, it sees something different than what our thoughts have. And that really struck me. And that's like in the first 5 pages. And I'm just slowly working through it because it's I could probably read that thing in a couple of days if I just wanted to go reading it. But to read it with kind of understanding, like getting it inside of you instead of just thoughts, you gotta go kind of slow because it's pretty intense. But I mentioned it the last time. You have a lot of bloodthirstiness in the Bible and a lot of books. It's just chop, 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 chop. Something about this planet just demands chop, 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 chop. And there's large sections of the Bible that seem to be written by a 13-year-old self-absorbed narcissist person. I don't know if that's necessarily how God is. That's what they say God's like. Very different. But, again, everybody had a local God to protect them from those people out there. And, I don't know why I'm saying so much. But generally, if you lost, your tribe got slaughtered. And so you wanted to have a God that would protect you. And God, it's like the God of the Israelites, once they conquered Jerusalem, or the town that became Jerusalem, and David made it the center of the state. Their God lived right there. It's people talk about King David. This town was probably maybe 5,000 people in it. And he's more kind of like a local, what would you call it? Some tough guy in the neighborhood who's running everything more than, the idea with the crown and the king and everything. And the deal is pretty much like most gods. We'll pay you tariff, you keep bad guys away. There's a big protection racket sort of thing. And there's a lot of glee about getting into battles and killing everybody and slaughtering and people bowing down and on and on. And it reads a lot like some self-absorbed, self-impressed teenager at times. A lot of people are writing it were self-absorbed, self-impressed teenagers. You know, generally, if you made it to 30, you were a very senior, wise person. And so it just ended up with, you know, what was his name? Alexander was like, I think, 20 when he became king. Started running around killing people, you know. For some reason, young 20-year-olds want to run around and impose their will on others and have themselves be declared godlike. Yeah, it's interesting. I had a discussion with a friend about, you know, submitting to God or getting a connection with God or however, and he made the comment. I mean, how could any person think they're God? You know, like, I don't know, talk to any 17-year-old. They seem to think the whole world's about them and they're the ones that can judge everything. So it's the idea that people would think they are gods. Isn't that unusual? But then there were like gods who, you know, like Baal was a storm god out by the Mediterranean, and his storms were they were severe, but they weren't too bad. But then, you know, the Tetragrammaton, the Yahweh is inland. There's a lot of crevices and mountains, and so, and Yahweh rained, water collected up and ravaged through the land. So he was a bit more of a dick, I guess. And then you had Elohim, pronounced differently. He was kind of a wiser, older, gentler, kinder form of God. But it seems like a lot of people just worshipped what they wanted and wanted to have a God that would do that. And then they'd make proclamations or predictions or prophecy, and yeah, it happened or it didn't. Or if you sit around for a couple thousand years, something will happen that looks like it happened. So it's pretty bizarre to read. A lot of, you know, what I read in the Quran read the same way. There's like this absolutely beautiful, insightful, deep, meaningful thing you'll read in the Quran or in the Bible, in the Bhagavad Gita. And about 20 pages later, and my enemies are around, and I slew their heads off and cut them off, and blah, 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 and our God conquered everywhere. And that still seems to kind of go on. It seems to fire up a lot of groups in the world. But if you're ever wondering why the Bible can be such an odd combination of so violent and bloodthirsty and uncaring about others and at the same time kind of universal and on and on. Yeah, gotta remember in Judaism, this idea of the inerrant word of God isn't something that happens. And there are a lot more books on the thoughts and philosophy and the religion of Judaism than what's in the Bible. That's what they picked into their book. And then a lot of it actually kind of came down to what Christians decided to have in it. There's a lot of writing that's completely extraneous to what's in the Bible that has just as much authority. You know, the whole inerrancy just seems to kind of come down to, I want to prove I'm right, and we got to make sure the book says this so I can be right. Yeah, it kind of comes down to Israel. The Israelites were a little tiny group of people in the middle of a bunch of big, nasty empires, and those empires kept running through their Israelites' turf. And so the Israelites kept trying to appealing to their God to protect them, and sort of took care of them most of the time. They didn't get wiped out like some cultures did. But an interesting thing happened when the Babylonian captivity was it went very monotheistic around Yahweh. But during the time of the captivity, there still kept being prophets and prophecy and teaching, which is kind of odd because if your God's set in a local area and you've been taken from there several hundred miles, and yet that God keeps showing up, suddenly the idea of a local, my God, my tribe's God starts becoming a little more universal. It's the saying I've always heard, the Israelites were taken into captivity, and when they were released, they came back as Judaism, because it was a very different religion. And yet that whole process is in the Bible. So at the beginning, you've got this very, our God, our little tribe God protecting us. And by the time they come back from the Babylonian captivity, Jews are still the people of the book, but God's like operating everywhere, and it started spreading around. And then, when you get to Christianity, there's, the big fight between all the apostles and Paul, because Paul wanted to go give it to the Gentiles, and the rest of the apostles were like, oh no, he came here, we're all Jewish, right? It's in this culture. And Paul's the one who actually made the big change. I was thinking, the main leader, Jesus, this nobody peasant carpenter in the backwoods of the back wilderness of the Roman Empire, comes here to proclaim the kingdom of God. Seems a little surprised that he's actually being crucified. John the Baptist was predicting, the big thing. He ended up getting killed. Paul's writings, he's like whipped and gets stoned and left for dead and gets brought back. And there's just all this stuff. All of Paul's churches were pretty much taken from him because the other apostles didn't quite like what he was writing. So from his point of view, his mission to bring the Jesus he experienced on the road to Damascus, kind of looked like a failure. And Jesus, he's sacrificed, and no big world change. Later on, Augustine would talk about, well, the city of God's already been established because we have, kind of world peace and order here. But that kind of ignores that one of the main reasons for that being that way is the Roman army, kind of like keeping the other people at bay and anybody in the empire under the thumb. And yet, something kept it going. Been some really evil, bad, horrible popes. There's been all sorts of heresy, which heresy just means to believe choice or to choose. It's just another choice. And when I go to church, we're all there, and we're there because of some experience we had, not because of some theological or doctrinal belief. But, I guess that's the difference between reading about God and having this experience. I was very mean, vicious, vindictive, and kind of liked reading the Bible stories about having vengeance on my enemies. Was it Samuel L. Jackson said he loved reading that quote in, whatever that movie was with John Travolta. At least I've seen so long ago. He liked reading it because he just loved the sentiment of it. But as I've gotten older and I've had this spiritual change and this energy just kind of entered into me and cleaned me out, it doesn't interest me at all. That whole my way or the highway thing I'm just like becoming very peaceful and calm and being open to transformation. What else are you going to do? Alexander spent his whole young life running running around slaughtering people to get him under his control, and then he got sick and died. And then his generals and whatever family divided up the empire, and then they all fought among each other, and it went away, and everything he strove for is just gone. Gone. All of it's gone. All these empires, Hitler's 1,000-year Reich lasted 11 years. Yet, oddly enough, this little nobody Paul running around telling people about this would probably sound like a hallucinatory, possibly psychologically questionable experience. Gets all of his churches taken from him. He had stored Rome, they think, and possibly Spain, but we don't know exactly where he really died. There's beliefs, there's traditions, but it doesn't actually say. Complete failure, everything he strove for completely fell apart, just like Alexander. Except Alexander's stuff's gone, and most of us that go to church kind of follow a Pauline theology. It's very interesting how history works. Anyway, the word of the Lord is in your heart. The Bible's just discussing it. May upset some of you, but that's where I stand. All right, thank you. DouglasSMcCarron.com. Help the people in your neighborhood. Hide them if certain agents are looking for them. And check out the merch store. A bit twisted. I think I mentioned earlier, but my movie Mysteries Whisper is out. It's on Film Freeway. I'm starting putting it into festivals, and I'm looking at a way to get it out for people to see. So I'll keep you informed. And the 41 of you who are subscribed, please ask your friends to subscribe and share this. I can tell you that I was dark, miserable, pissed off, vindictive, self-loathing, and now I'm calm and peaceful, and I have to just chalk it up to this energy that I really can't describe came into me and just kind of cleaned all that out. I hesitate to give it a name because that name isn't it. I just want to let you know it is there.